Hey everyone, I'm Cody.
And I'm Brent.
And we are the Hugonauts, here to review for you the best science fiction novels of all time. And speaking of all time, this week we have Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, which is, if not arguably the best science fiction novel of all time, definitely the most popular. Also, next week, we have Ted Chiang, who I'm very excited to finally be reviewing. We'll be talking about his short story collection, The Story of Your Life and Others. The Story of Your Life itself being the short or novella that the movie Arrival is based on. I've wanted to talk about Ted Chiang for a very long time, and also excited to do our first short story collection and dig into that. So make sure you subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, or follow if you're just listening on whatever podcast app you have, so you don't miss any Ted Chiang stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of, we also have launched social media accounts. So check us out at Hugonauts Podcast. We'll have a little bit of extra content that we're posting there, but also just really excited to be able to actually talk and interact and talk about these books, which we can't really do any other way. So please do come there. Let us know what you think of the books, and also if you want to recommend stuff that we should talk about in the future. So check us out at Hugonauts Podcast.
Yes, we are excited to talk to more people than just each other about these books. But speaking of, let's get into the summary of Ender's Game in case some of you haven't somehow read this book.
For sure. So Ender's Game is a nice and tight book. It's 324 pages, 10 and a half hours on audio. And it's the story of Ender Wiggin, who is a boy who's recruited into the elite orbital battle school, which is where young men and women are trained to be the next generation of military leaders to command the forces of humanity against the buggers. And the buggers are these insect-like aliens who have attempted to invade the solar system twice. And in the most recent invasion, they almost eradicated humanity. It was disastrous. And so now humanity has sent fleets out to the bugger worlds to try and stop a third invasion from ever coming to Earth. And Ender is a brilliant, empathetic kid, but he's felt mostly alone his entire life. He's got this older brother, Peter, who's like a violent sociopath. And Ender's only sister, Valentine, is like the only one who's been protecting him from Peter. But then he's pulled away from Valentine, and now he's at battle school where he's even more alone. He's surrounded by children who are significantly older than him. And all the adults at battle school are constantly pushing him to his limits and trying to force him to be more violent, which he doesn't want to be, in an attempt to either break him or turn him into the best military commander the Earth has ever produced. So that's the situation.
That's Ender's Game. That's the setup. Once again, if you haven't read it, just go read it. Everyone's read it.
For good reason. It's book, so good.
Which, here we go again. Left Hand of Darkness is the only book we've done this with before. 5 out of 5 for both of us. I gave it a 5. It's just, it's a classic of science fiction, and every time I've reread it, I've read it 3 times, it's lived up to its place on the pedestal. There's no reason to knock it off.
Yeah. Rereading this for me was such a treat. Ender's Game was one of the first sci-fi books I ever read when I was a kid. I read a few Heinleins before that, but that was it. So I was a little nervous about reading it again, but on the reread, the same thing happened to me. I read it in 36 hours. I couldn't put it down. And the messages and man, you just want to root for this kid so much. And it's incredible. Let's talk about it. I'm so excited to talk about this book.
Yeah, we're about to talk about all the things you just alluded to. Which first, let's start with the kind of the premise, where we are. The plot is almost all this battle school and then battle simulation training for Ender, and it smacks of. I feel like we were talking about this. This is your words, but we have a little bit of a blank school obsession for children.
Society loves the kids in the school learning the weird stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Harry Potter is the most successful book series of all time. Before that, and very similar, was Ursula K. Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea series, about kids in wizard school with houses. Very similar books. Anyway, interesting side note there.
Definitely a lot of lifts directly from Wizard of Earthsea by J.K. Rowling. Ursula K. Le Guin even has like a scathing review of someone who reviewed Harry Potter for saying like, wow, the first fantasy I've read like this, what a cool thing to bring to the fantasy world. And Ursula K. Le Guin's like, maybe you should read fantasy before you review books or something like that. It was awesome.
Yeah, which isn't to say Harry Potter's not great. Harry Potter is,
right.
But the point we're making here is like, why is this such a popular, there's clearly something in that like speaks really deeply to us. And yeah, I don't know, like, are all of the most successful stories that have ever been told like YA books? Like, why is it
these
that
young
those
adult
books are our young adult books? Like, why are they so popular? It's such an interesting.
Well, I have a couple.
Thing.
I mean, I have a few thoughts about. First of all, I think the reason it's so appealing is because we all see. It's so not mundane, and the idea that you could go away from your normal mundane life and focus on like one really cool thing, like learning magic or learning science or learning video games, basically like Ender, like sports and video games.
Yeah, Ender basically is playing like dope video games all day. Yeah, that's true.
We have a propensity to imagine. It's the same reason we like post-apocalyptic literature. It's like to imagine erasing all of the mundane day-to-day like chores and maintenance of relationships and acquaintance, with acquaintances and people we'd rather not talk to, but they're like colleagues, that kind of stuff, and just wiping that all away and focusing on like one or two things at a time. And that's something about our nature that just is appealing in this lit. I also think that to parse it out and maybe lead you into thinking about why you like why you think YA is so popular. I feel like it's YA, but maybe more specifically that it's a coming of age story, and so we can all relate to it because we've all been there.
I think that's a huge part of it, and I love coming of age stories. Who doesn't? Like, we've all done that, and the other like secret thing is that like really why adults like it too is actually you get to do this like several times in your life. When you like make that big life change, you decide you're gonna like become a different person than you were before, and those are the exciting, confusing like times in life that are fun to think about. And then the last thing I'll say is I think that like, when a book appeals to younger people as well, that's just like more total people that can like the thing. And young people get like really fanatical about stuff and are such huge fans. So I think that's part of why YA books get so huge and so popular as well. But anyway, all that to say, I'm not a huge like YA guy in general, but like I absolutely recommend this book, Ender's Game, to everyone of every age. Like, it's so, and actually like when I read it when I was a kid, there's some serious stuff that happens in this book. I think there's nothing like the kids shouldn't be reading, but it's like there's some real world things that are going on here that are like kind of dark and serious.
And I guess that's why I would maybe even just say coming of age story instead of YA in general. Because I think you're right about like the numbers, and I think you make a really good point about the passion, because there's definitely stories that I still love that I've shown other people and they, have read as adults and they're like, it was fine. And I'm like, no, it's the best ever. And it's because I have nostalgia from reading it as a teenager and just feeling so passionately about it that it never abates. So if you read something at that age, like, you still have that passion for it because of the nostalgia.
Yeah.
So
sure.
maybe that is why they're all so popular, because they leverage that passion and then you stay with them for the rest of your life. Much like all of the Warped Tour music that I still only listen to from like Warped Tour 2002.
Yeah, I mean that's right though.
Now.
It's like all the stuff you like the most is the stuff that happened when your brain was like on hormones.
Anyway. On hormones. Yeah, exactly. So speaking of this book, that was the worst segue I've ever done. Let's talk about Ender, the character.
Yeah, I love Ender. I think he's impossible not to like. He's so smart. I mean, even in the book, he's supposed to be like the smartest kid ever. At the beginning of the book, he's 6 years old and they take him away from his family, which is like, how can you not root for the 6-year-old who's on his own in the world? And the core, like the thing that differentiates himself from the other people, there's some other very, very smart people in the book, notably his siblings. But the thing that differentiates him from each of them is he's got like this combination of like drive and ruthlessness paired with such deep empathy. He cares so much for everyone around him. And how can you not like someone like that? You know, he's just such a likable person. You want to root for him so much.
Yeah, which is, you know, quick aside, it's always interesting to me when you're reading a book and you're trying to get with the age of the character, and the character's just kind of in your mind as some amorphous thing, and then you're like, wait, he's 6? And then you think of like what a 6-year-old is. You're like, I don't know, maybe it was different 40 years ago when this book was written around, but like,
yeah, he's a weird 6-year-old.
This kid is an old 6-year-old. It still makes sense that it and you know, I just think it's always funny to actually try to tack on an age. It's like one of those descriptors that maybe,
yeah, I think even at the end of the book, he's
need.
like, isn't he like 11 or 12 or something?
Yeah,
he's still
you always
so
think
young.
they're older. Maybe that's colored by how films are cast too. Like films are always acted by people who are older than the age they're supposed to represent. So maybe that's just something that films have done to our brains.
Could be. So what about the siblings? What do you think of Peter and Valentine?
Yeah, so we have Peter and Valentine. They're kind of like two halves of Ender's personality in different people. And I had forgotten about this part of the book until my reread, because it's been like, I don't know, 12 years or something. And I was fascinated by this part of the book because it's incredibly prescient. Basically, they make Peter and Valentine make these characters that go on the internet, you know, the web, to preach two philosophical ideals that are in contradiction, and they become
they're political.
Popular.
They're like political. They're making political points on like very opposite ends of the spectrum, pretending to hate each other, but really they're actually working together to try to get people to think one thing. Yeah,
they're in cahoots the whole time to get people to disagree with each other so they can manipulate them into thinking what the two of them, the two children, want them to think. And it's just a little disturbing reading it now, because you could see that as something that, you know, could possibly happen.
Media. Yeah,
probably
absolutely.
Children couldn't trick everybody, but two adults certainly could pit the whole world versus each other politically.
For sure. Or like governments like the Russians who are constantly doing crazy stuff on social media. Anyway. But yeah, so and just to put the two halves of Ender's personality. So Peter is like the ultra violent one. He's got like the violence and none of the empathy. He's like a very scary character. And then Valentine has like all of the empathy and none of the like ruthlessness, which is why they didn't get picked for the battle school, but Ender did. And so they're just like is an interesting way. Orson Scott Card sort of used them as like foils for Ender to be like, hey, here's like extreme versions of him. And then Ender, it's easier for him to say like, okay, Ender's the middle of those, because it's easier to show an extreme. So I thought it was a really good sort of way to illustrate that and get us to really understand clearly who Ender is. And
quickly, right? Like that's a very literal example. So you can kind of, you're viscerally like feeling that and understanding it right away, instead of having to be like explained or shown very slowly. So it gets us into the story quickly. And then we have some other characters, like Graff, the battle school commander.
Yeah, Graff is the last one I would want to talk about. I really liked him. He's the one who more than anyone else is like pushing Ender so ruthlessly. But there's some sections where we get to see Graff talking with other adults, and it really raises some interesting questions about like, does Graff have empathy? How does he feel about Ender? And it sort of raises some really interesting sort of like questions about like parenting, basically. Like he's not no parent should be like Graff. But he had sort of, Orson Scott Card is sort of like raising this fundamental question about like, you know, you can't be too soft on your kids because they're about to go see a world where you're not there. And it's, you know, it's just this really interesting question of like, does Graff really care about the kids? And you can probably tell from the way I'm describing this that I think Graff cares about the kids, but I do think there's an argument to be made about that because he's putting them through some really serious stuff.
Right. And he's kind of like the surrogate parent too, because Ender's real parents are both alive at the beginning of the book, and they, you know, just kind of like let him go because of social norms. You know, they just fling him off basically. So that also says something about parenting. And Graff, and he likes all the other, he has that feeling towards a lot of the other students at the battle school who we don't need to go into each and every one of them. But there's a lot of other, you know, friends and enemies Ender makes along the way that make the story interesting, and, you know, things go from there.
Should we talk about the empathy? Like that's the big thing in this book, right? Is like,
yeah, that's what I was going to say is the most important message the book kind of makes through Ender is that, is like the empathy versus game theory debate, or like empathy in game theory. It's a very specific exploration, but the idea that to win at something, where there is a W column and an L column, you really need to be strategically, you need to be empathetic so you can be at your strategic best, and you need to understand your enemy and what they do and how they think, to be able to beat them. But then the irony, of course, is that if you do that, then you feel bad for beating them. And that's kind of Ender's whole struggle throughout the book with his various competitions.
Yeah. And I loved it because this is a book that praises empathy. Basically, it says like it's showing that like empathy can be a superpower. You know, if you can really truly care about other people, understand what they want, what they need, then you can accomplish huge things, and you can decide whether or not you want to do the thing that person wants you to do or not. But you really should understand why they want you to do it, and then you can sort of make your own decision. And I don't know, I just think it's a trait that like in our society, like in our American society at least, we don't place enough value on. And it's so refreshing and great to read a book that makes this kid a superhero because he's got this incredible empathy, and it shows what you can achieve with this, with just that ability to really put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand how they feel, and how much that lets you, even if you just want to accomplish things in the world, that's still something that you should really try to refine and have in yourself. And then of course it makes you a much more understanding person. So anyway, I really, really, really like it.
Yeah, Brene Brown, the podcaster and writer, the vulnerability researcher, she says empathy is a superpower. That's her.
Oh, really?
That's like her
that must
thing.
be why that's in my head.
So I think it also points out something else interesting, which is that perhaps we have the wrong goals in things, right? Like the win, the W in the W column, it's like can make you feel bad if you're really the best at it. You know, that can also be maybe not the goal. Maybe the goal is to feel and try to commune and be with others instead of beat them at things, which is, you know.
Yeah, the world is like not a zero-sum
point.
game. Yeah, and hold on, we're not trying to say you shouldn't like try hard at sports. That's not the point here. This is
correct.
They're having a war in the book, which
the world is not a zero-sum game is a perfect way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not you don't have to. You winning at things doesn't mean other people lose in almost everything except like sports.
Right. And I guess sports are there so that we can do that in a safe way.
Yeah, that's right.
And to extrapolate on your point, I think basically what you're trying to say about like even if you're the most selfish person imaginable, empathy will still help you achieve your goals. Like and hopefully through learning it, you become a less selfish person. But this book points that all up. That's really the core the core here.
Should we talk about some of the like science and technology stuff that gets used in the book?
Yes, we definitely should. Beginning with, we have the Ansible.
Which if you're not familiar, it's an instantaneous communication device. Basically, like the speed of light is real in all ways except information. You can transmit information instantaneously across any distance. And he calls it I really like the way he did this in the book. He says like, oh, it's called the Ansible. I can't really remember why. I think like some science fiction, some writer a long time ago called it that, which is like a nod to Ursula K. Le Guin, who first talked about the Ansible.
Right.
So it was like a really nice little homage to the creator of that idea.
And apparently, if you're going to write a book about a school, you got to borrow from Ursula K. Le Guin. Or lift from it's inevitable. Yeah. So yeah, they have the Ansible to communicate, and then other than that, it's pretty much just like what did we write? Like how this stuff works. It's sci-fi and it's cool. It's all the basics. It's like the ships. There's got some FTL drives, and there's a little bit.
Oh, they're
of
not
relativity
FTL. They're
stuff.
Exactly TL.
Sorry. They're TL.
Yeah. Anyway, they're not faster than light. They are light
They're
drives.
C drives.
Yeah.
They're lowercase C drives.
There you go. Yeah.
And then you got like some weapons like the Little Doctor. They have cool names. And then rotating space stations. The games they play at Battle School are very either like sim heavy or like 0G sports. So just
Scary space insects.
The buggers.
We love
scary
those.
space insects. Yeah. So basically all the standard sci-fi fare, and maybe on
the light end of the sci-fi.
Softer, the softer
not
to mid
really
end,
fleshed out. Mm-hmm. Not strictly speaking physically possible. Probably in Speaker for the Dead about the faster than light drives, he actually sort of just mentions like, oh, it sure seems like we're creating like an impossible amount of energy for free. Like, I wonder how this works. And that's it.
Yeah, he's like, at least is like, yeah, this is stupid, but I'm gonna keep doing it. We all love it, so let's just do it.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about first of all just the book, and Orson Scott Card. So we'll start with just that. It's interesting that both Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead won the Hugo and the Nebula Award in back-to-back years, which is nuts.
Speaker for the Dead is the sequel, if you're not familiar to
Sorry, yes. Some other authors have achieved such, but it's definitely rare. And
never twice in a row. Never.
Oh, never twice in a row?
No.
Yeah. Okay, so the double-double, only Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead. And we feel like that has to be because of how he wrote this series, which is very interesting. He wrote Speaker for the Dead, the sequel, and he kind of that was his prize, that was his real book that he loved. And then he wrote Ender's Game as like a contextual prequel to Speaker for the Dead, so that people could understand Speaker for the Dead better. And then so he had both books finished, which is how we think he did it. But it's also fascinating that Ender's Game is like the most popular science fiction novel of all time, when it was kind of like the baby to Speaker for the Dead.
Yeah, in the author's mind. Yeah. I think the public's view is generally right. I like Speaker for the Dead as well, but not Ender's Game is like unbelievable. Speaker for the Dead is like quite good, but to me, like, so anyway, it just shows you like as a, you never know where the great stuff is going to come from. We just got to be happy that it's out there.
Yeah. And we also have to sometimes, we want to acknowledge this because it's such a big, it's really in your face, especially if you search anywhere online. That Orson Scott Card is a pretty controversial author, especially for his kind of homophobic.
Yeah, he's like very outspoken about his homophobia. Yeah, he
politically active about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there is a boycott going on of his writing. So if you want to read Ender's Game, you could get it from the library or whatever. We looked into it a little bit, and it seems like he might have signed a a finite deal when he wrote these, and he's not getting any residuals from the publishing company. But you could be
we're not exactly sure. And it's like it's so bizarre that he is this like outspoken homophobe when he wrote like the most incredible book about empathy. I don't get it. Exactly. I don't get how it can be the same person. But anyway, this is an incredible book. You should read it. The messages in it are wonderful. There's like one sexist thing that he says at the beginning where he's like, "Oh, girls are innately not as good at war." But that's the only thing that happens in the whole book where I had sort of any cringe factor.
Petra.
Yeah, there's a great female
Petra who's
leader.
like the best shooter. So and great leader. I was going to say this basically the same thing you were going to say, but separating author from the art, like the a special reason, like especially didn't feel bad reading this, knowing this about Orson Scott Card, because he wrote, this is like a manual for how to understand the needs and wants of others and like live in their shoes and treat them with respect. And so it's so ironic that he's got these views.
So
Anyways,
anyway, you should know. Now you know. Yeah. So shall we?
Great novel. Let's find some books. Yeah. Let's recommend some other books.
Before we recommend other books, though, we're going to do something a little different this time. In our Rendezvous with Rama episode, a few episodes ago, we did have a spoiler section at the end, and it seemed like people liked that quite a lot. So we're going to do that again. So we're going to do similar books to recommend, and then after that, we're going to talk about the end of Ender's Game. So let's do books to recommend, and stick around if you want the spoilers. Yeah.
Similar books is tough because it's kind of an archetypal book in the like coming of age science fiction. Yeah, but it's also like Ender's Game version of the hero's journey. Like it itself is archetypal on top of that. I think we can start with saying Speaker for the Dead is also great. You should definitely read Speaker for the Dead. Yeah. It's a totally different book. It has a lot of the same themes, but it feels a lot different. And Ender is an adult, etc. It's quite good. I actually liked it more than Ender's Game.
That's interesting. Maybe we'll have to do a Speaker for the Dead episode.
Just barely. Sometime. I really like Speaker for the Dead.
Okay, for sure. I'll go with Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, which is like the original War Against the Space Insects book. Really fun, great book that we'll probably end up talking about at some point on the show. But in any case, highly recommend reading it. It's a really fun read. We got Starship Troopers is probably the only one that is like not an obvious recommendation. It's like a different author and a different book because Speaker for the Dead. And then we really couldn't, you could read pretty much any other archetypal hero's journey thing, or just like archetypal lit in general. Like a lot of the stuff we compared this to is like Gilgamesh. Jesus from the
what
Bible.
Else we have? Shakespeare from a writer perspective. Like you see a lot of Ender's Game tropes and plot points in other science fiction novels, much like Shakespeare. Like Shakespeare's stories are often like kind of configured for new things.
Let me take a slightly different take on that here, which is that Ender's Game is a reconfiguration of Shakespeare stories, which lots of other books also are. But anyway.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like there's also like a next level where there's a lot of books that you quote, they use a lot of Ender's Game.
Sure, I hear you. I just don't want to call Orson Scott Card Shakespeare. They're different on different levels.
That's true. You're very right about that. Very, very true. And then I don't know, like Star Wars or something is.
Star Wars is for sure exactly the same thing.
Although I will say here, because I will keep saying it, Star Wars is fantasy, not science fiction.
Now we're gonna get in a fight on the internet. Okay, and then there's a couple other like good YA sci-fi books we wanted to recommend. We don't often, we don't talk about a lot of YA stuff, but there are some great ones we wanted to bring up. I'll recommend if you want to scratch your YA sci-fi itch, I'll recommend The Hunger Games, the first one. I think that first one is great, such a page turner. I think they sort of kind of steadily get worse throughout that series, but there was the reason that first one was so popular. It's really, really fun. It's not as the messages aren't as big, and I don't think it's nearly as timeless as Ender's Game, but like there was a reason that was a really popular series.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, another one that people might have read in or around the same time or in place of in like 5th or 6th grade in their middle school English classes, The Giver, the dystopian classic. That's also a great book. I was going to say movie because Harrison Ford is in the Giver movie and the Ender's Game movie, which
They're
are both
kind of bad though, right? I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I think the Ender's Game movie, they did what they could with it. It's obvious to make that into to make the book into a single movie, they did a good job adapting it, and it's just not as good as a movie. That's my opinion, really.
Okay, for
sure. So let's move on to
should we talk about the end?
The post spoilers.
Yeah, so if you have not read it yet and you want to, before you know what happens, turn aside here.
Then goodbye, we're the Hugonauts. Thanks for joining us.
That's right. So yeah, let's talk about the end. We'll give people a second. Okay, so there's a huge twist.
All right, just intrepid travelers left here.
Yeah, there's a huge twist in this book, which we wanted to be able to talk about. So of course, at the very end, Ender thinks he's going through like the next level of battle school and fighting these simulated wars. And there's this huge last epic battle that he's told is his last battle of training. But really, it turns out he's been fighting the buggers the entire time, commanding the fleets remotely using this Ansible instantaneous communication. And he, in fact, eradicates the buggers from the galaxy. He kills them all. And when they tell him that,
all but one.
Oh, well, that's it. Oh, I was about to say no, that's a horrible spoiler, but we're in the spoiler section. That's right.
Now we're free. Spoiler only.
Yeah, but yeah, so it's such an interesting thing because of course Ender is like never would have wanted to destroy the buggers. He wouldn't have done it if he had known that if he was really fighting them the whole time. So that was the way they sort of like got this person who was so empathetic to do this, like commit Orson Scott Card invents the word xenocide to stand in for like eradicating an entire species.
Yeah. And this is like the eponymous twist, by the way. I call it like the Ender's Game twist, and I feel like I've seen it in a lot of other stuff. But you're right about the foreshadowing like on reread. Like you get these little pieces. Like what was the one that you found?
I really liked he has a friend named Dink at the battle school who at one point like tells him like, hey, like this whole thing, they're tricking us, right? Like it's very clear that they actually don't really care about us competing with each other. This is like all about fighting the buggers. The whole thing, they're trying to deceive us the whole way along. And Ender's like, oh yeah, you're right. But then like, kind of Ender and we forget that by the time he gets to the next stage of the battle school where they tell him he's just in training again, but really he's fighting the buggers.
Right. And he's kind of like, you as well as him are kind of distracted away from Dink's, like you move past it, but in a way that makes sense. And it's to the narrative. And, but yeah, it is like, oh yeah, I forgot about this part. I did not notice that the first time. We just kind of left it. And then there's other little clues around town.
Just before in the final battle, they tell him like, oh, this is your graduation. It's a big deal. And like all the most important people on Earth are like at his graduation test. And so you're just so excited to find out what happens that you kind of just like keep turning the pages. But in retrospect, it's like, oh, well, obviously like the president probably wouldn't have gone to like some kid's graduation from school. Like it's,
but to credit to the writing, you feel just as tense about Ender, about these tests. So you're not noticing how weird it is that they're all there because you're feeling the same tension as the main character, which is,
absolutely.
That's next level. He also, I just wanted to say real quick as like a thing you brought up pre-spoiler section, Valentine and Peter, you have like the all empathy and then the no empathy, all gamesmanship, and the family's allowed to have the third child, Ender. Even though most families only get 2, because the battle school, the hegemony the military wants a mix of these two things. So not only are the characters, they get you into the empathy theme real quick, but it's also like an interesting commentary by Card on genetic manipulation kind of sci-fi tropes, and I think in a lot of the best science fiction, we get these things where they just kind of happen and we don't focus on them too much, and the book's just like jam-packed with sci-fi tropes and themes, and there's so many of them that the author can just kind of gloss over a little one that is a cool thought instead of focusing in on it because there's so many of them, and that makes the world really rich.
Yeah, for sure. The other like post spoilers thing I'd want to talk about is it's like really interesting that he has Peter, Ender's like sociopathic brother, becomes like the hegemon, like the emperor of all of Earth. And so he and Valentine's like social media manipulation, plot basically like it succeeds to the point that he gets to like ascend and become the president of the entire planet. And that is, I think, a really interesting point about like, the people who like aspire to that kind of thing. Like it seems to attract a lot of like kind of sociopathic people. And I think it's an interesting, we are recording this like the day after Putin invaded Ukraine. It's really a shame that, the people who are attracted to power like that seem like very frequently to be kind of monsters. And so anyway, it was just interesting that Orson Scott Card had that happen.
Or attracted to power at the level that's required in a world so populous to ascend to that level of power, perhaps. Or not.
Yeah. And I'm not saying everybody who's in power is a monster, but it does certainly seem to attract like quite a lot of monsters.
And yeah, exactly. And I think, and Card almost makes the point that it's necessary in the book, which I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that.
I'm not sure how I felt about it either. Like, I'm not sure how I felt about him becoming hegemon at the end, because I was like, are you saying that like you have to be a sociopath?
They gloss it over, but they sort of seem to be saying that he was actually a good leader, which at the beginning of the book, they had him like skinning squirrels in the woods. He was like fully a violent psychopath. And so I'm not sure Peter's, as we're talking this out, like I'm not sure it totally makes sense that they say Peter was like a great leader, but anyway, I guess I'm glad he was.
Yeah, it felt, exactly. It felt a little incongruous because it was like, you need to be this crazy to rise to power. And then you can be a good leader then and not skin rabbits anymore. No, you're going to skin more rabbits because you're stressed. And then finally, a couple more things. The value of communication is really paramount here. We have this through line in Battle School where Ender is playing this video game that they used to test the children during his off time, and it's this weird fantasy game where he has to follow through a number of tests, and eventually he breaks through past where the game's coded. And he continues to see this weird room with a lot of kind of, subconscious dream-like representations of his sister and his brother and himself. But he sees this structure over and over, and this egg in the middle of it. And it ends up being where the aliens they only communicate telepathically, but we're not able to receive those signals. So the aliens are trying to communicate that their first invasion was an accident. They didn't realize humans were different than them and all had individual minds, and are sorry for attacking, but we're still going to wipe them out anyways because they can't communicate that to us. So they, through this video game, communicate to Ender how where the last queen's egg is hidden, so that he can go find it and then become the speaker for the dead in the next book. And we also get something you wanted to talk about, a very long denouement to this book, which makes sense because it's the prequel to sequel for the dead, but the denouement is also very interesting.
I liked it quite a bit because it like let you. The ending was so intense, or the climax, I guess, and this battle school, and there's this huge reveal, and just because the book was such a crazy page turner, it actually felt right that it had kind of a quite long falling action, and to give you a second to like breathe and understand the characters like as adults a little bit because they were all children throughout the course of the book, I think. I just thought it was well done, and it was. I'm so happy that Orson Scott Card wanted to write the second book so that he felt like he had to write this one. It's just like such a. You can tell when you get to the end of Ender's Game that he like so much had a sequel in mind, and maybe that's why the sequel's great. A lot of books that we talk about, the sequels tend to get a lot worse than the first one. In this case, the second one's still very, very good. I think that's because the author the whole time knew exactly where they wanted to take it. So anyway, yeah, really, really phenomenal book. I'm so glad we finally got to talk about this one.
Yeah, me too. There's a reason it's the most popular, because it's pretty good. I almost said some swear words, but I have to then bleep those out later, and that's not fun. So just mouth for that. So yeah, it was really fun to talk about. Next week again, Ted Chiang. Very stoked about that. And come at us on social media.
Yeah, let us know what you think of Ender's Game on at Hugonauts Podcast, and we look forward to sort of talking with everybody there. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Keep reading, everybody. Later.
Bye.